Daniel, you just saying, I mean, actually, you already started talking about what I wanted to ask you about. Talking about race in Portuguese and talking about race in English are very different things. And I was just wondering, one thing I'd like to ask you more is about the challenges of translating ideas, expressions, and words related to race that you came across while translating this book.
I mean, one thing to say, Christina, is I spent a long time thinking about and struggling with a problem that I subsequently decided wasn't actually a problem, and there was a much easier solution that I should have thought about earlier. Because I spent quite a long time struggling with the fact that, as I said before, language is contingent. It's contingent on historical and cultural things. It doesn't happen outside of society and so forth. And as a result, trying to map discourse that is happening in one very specific place in one country in one language into another one is always going to be a struggle. There's always going to be a friction. There's always going to be a failure to fit. And so if you have a situation where, for example, in this particular context, Portuguese has more than one word for black, those two words don't map exactly onto two words in English, and that's always going to be difficult. And so my first struggle, and the struggle which I then decided was actually not the thing to be worrying about, was trying to figure out how to map the conversations that are happening in this book onto the way in which race is talked about in the English-speaking world, which is itself obviously an enormous and incredibly various thing. If there are two different words for black in English, if there are in Portuguese, if there are three different words for brown, which are used in slightly different ways, what are going to be the English, as it were, equivalents? And then I started thinking that actually trying to map it onto a different discourse and trying to think in terms of equivalence is actually probably wrong, because the point is not to make the Brazilian arguments, the Brazilian conversations, feel like the conversations that we may be having in London, or the conversation we may be having somewhere else in the English-speaking world. The issue is, how do you present as truthfully as possible what is actually happening in this book? And so I stopped worrying about how to try to squeeze the conversations in this book into the language that I would normally be comfortable with, and my friends would normally be comfortable with. It's obvious that there will be words that look the same in Portuguese and English. A word like mulatto will look the same in Portuguese and English. The weight of that word is really different. The way that word has been used historically is really different in different parts of English and different parts of Portuguese. And so rather than trying to find a way of kind of mapping it on, the only thing I could think to do was accept that some people are going to be surprised that there are some things in Portuguese that are more offensive than English. There are some things that are the other way around. There are some things that are going to have words that will be used by surprising people in some contexts. And so it became then a process, and this is something Paulo helped with very much when he worked on the draft with me, of just trying to understand as much as possible what's happening in the Portuguese and sort of put it in the English, rather than adapt it, or rather than try to find a way of making it sound like a conversation that people would be comfortable having in London or Detroit or in Dublin or in all of these massively different parts of the English-speaking world. So yes, I spent a long time worrying about something that I then thought the most honest thing to do is just is to translate as little as possible. And if that means producing a picture that I hope is as honest as possible about the conversations that are happening in Brazil about the subject, that may be a challenge to some of the dogmatic ways we talk about things in English, then probably translation should be doing that. Probably that's quite a good thing, that bringing literature from one set of readers to another set of readers, that should be a benefit, I think.